will now be in session. All rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic.
Ilan na? Si Minority Leader. I'll suspend before after prayer. The 44th session of the Senate and the second regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. Today we will be led in prayer by distinguished colleague, Senator Pia Cayetano.
Let us put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Almighty Father, we praise and glorify your name. We stand before you today asking for your wisdom as we fulfill our duty to the people. We turn to your holy word for guidance. In Proverbs 28, verse 4, it says, "Those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but those who keep the law strive against them." Grant us the strength to stand firm in upholding our country's laws and constitution and in safeguarding the rights of every people. Hindi na ho namin kailangan banggitin ang mga salitang PI, hindi na ho namin kailangan banggitin ang mga nasa likod at nasa harap nitong mga paglapastangan ng aming constitution. You know the hearts of people, Lord. You know things even before they happen. We ask that you lead us to the right path, so we may never lose sight of our vision of creating a sustainable future for all, particularly by pushing for sound policies, quality education, healthcare services, decent work, sustainable communities, equality, and more. In your holy name, we humbly commit to serving the Filipinos with unwavering dedication. Amen.
Amen. Session suspended for 1 minute.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar, Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
With 22 senators present, the chair declares the presence of quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, we'd like to acknowledge some guests from the gallery. We have with us guests of Senator Poe, Mr. Kurt Santiago, Mr. Earth Philippines 2023, guest of Senator Go, Congressman Joseph Biolago of the 2nd District of Nueva Ecija, guests of Senator Legarda and Alan Cayetano, Mayor Mar Mission of San Remillo, Antique, Senator Gatchalian's guests, barangay officials of Bagong Ilog, Pasig, guests of our Senate President Zubiri Lester Olalia of Quezon City Youth Parliament, and guests of Senator Go, Mayor Dionisio Cabahug of Tubod, Lanao del Norte, and LGU officials. We welcome all of them in this August chamber.
Yes, welcome to your Senate, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. President, this juncture, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 43rd session, Monday, January 29, 2024, and consider the same as approved.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
You want me to reference?
Yes.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
There being no objection, we ask the Secretary to proceed with the reference of business.
Resolutions. Proposed Senate Resolution 917, commending and honoring Arsenio Nick J. Lizazo for his invaluable contributions and promotion of the country's art and culture. Senator Angara.
to the Committee on Rules. He's still alive, right? Ah, he's alive, okay. I thought it was a posthumous recognition. Thank God it's not. Please
Proposed
proceed.
Senate Resolution 918, directing the Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs to conduct an inquiry on the alleged involvement of a Philippine National Police personnel on the tragic shootout in Cotabato City and the alleged manipulation surrounding the investigation of the incident. Senator De La Rosa.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
919, amending Section 42, Rule 14 of the Senate Rules to require the adoption of a resolution by a majority vote of all its members when attending a joint session with the House of Representatives by Senator Zubiri, Legarda, Villanueva, and Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Rules. Majority Leader, sorry.
May I ask for a minute suspension, Mr.
Yeah,
President?
session suspended for 1 minute.
I move that we may
Session resumed.
ready to resume, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 916, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 919. This is the resolution amending the rules of the Senate. I so move, Mr. President.
There have been objection. Motions approved. We ask Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Resolution amending Section 42, Rule 14 of the Rules of the Senate pertaining to the conduct of sessions.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, may I be recognized to sponsor the measure, Mr. President?
Yes, our distinguished Majority Floor Leader, Chairman of the Committee on Rules, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, as chairperson of the Committee on Rules, it is my honor and privilege to sponsor proposed Senate Resolution number 916, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 919. This is an amendment of our Senate rules, specifically Rule 14, Section 42, in accordance with Section 16, number 3, Article 6 of our Constitution, which provides that each House shall determine the rules of its proceedings. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, that is
Thank you.
sponsorship,
Please
Mr.
proceed.
President. Mr. President, no member wishes to interpolate or propose amendments to the rules. To the measure, I move that we adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 916, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 919, subject to style. I so move, Mr.
There have
President.
been no objection to the motion to propose Senate Resolution number 916, taking consideration proposed Senate Resolution 919, is hereby adopted and approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. May I move that all members of the Senate present here today be made co-authors of this resolution. So move, Mr.
There have
President.
been no objection. The motion is approved.
Ask for a minute suspension.
Session suspended. Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the body, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 920. This is the resolution giving authority to the Senate President. I so move, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Majority Leader. There being no objection, we ask Secretary to proceed. Reading of the time.
Resolution 920, resolution authorizing the Senate President.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, may I be recognized to sponsor the measure in view of recent events and the decisions of the Supreme Court. May I,
Maybe you can just insert it for the record.
yes, Mr. President, and may I just move that we adopt Senate Resolution number 920.
There being no
So moved, Mr.
objection,
President.
motion is approved.
Mr. President, no member wishes to interpolate or propose any amendments to the measure. I move that we adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 920, subject to style. So move, Mr.
There
President.
being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, thank you, and with the permission of the body, I move that all members of the Senate be made co-authors of this resolution.
There being no objection, motion is approved. We may proceed to the CA appointments if
Mr. President, may I just ask
Session
for a
suspended
minute?
for 1 minute.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body and pursuant to Section 18, Article 6 of the 1987 Constitution, I move to elect the new members of the Commission on Appointments, Senator Rafi Tulfo, Vice Senator Nancy Binay, this representation, Joel Villanueva, Vice Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito, Senator Ronald Bato de Rosa, Vice Senator Francis Tol Tolentino, Senator Bong Revilla, Vice Senator Amy Marcos. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader, the hereby aforementioned names are now newly elected members of the Commission on Appointments. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2449 under Committee Report number 137. This is the bill on the organizational reforms in the Philippine National Police. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we have closed the period of interpellations and debates. With that, I move to open the period of amendments.
There being no objection, period of amendments are open.
With no committee amendments, Mr. President, I move to open the period of individual amendments and recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa. So move, Mr.
Our
President.
distinguished colleague, Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa from Davao and Bohol is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Majority Leader. Mr. President, on page 1, line 1, insert a new section that reads, Section 1, short title, This Act shall be known as the PNP Organizational Reform Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment is approved.
On page 2, line 7, before the word deputy, insert the following, Chief of the PNP. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, motion is approved.
On the same page, line 15, after the word commands, insert, comma, headed by a commander. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment is approved.
On the same page, line 20 to 21, after the word of, delete the phrase, the Organic Act of the Autonomous Region of the Cordilleras, and I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment is approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is from Senator Chis Escudero. On page 3, line 14, after the word pattern, insert the following, including plantilla positions for the non-uniform personnel. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment is approved.
On page 7, line 20, before the word operational, insert the following, administrative, and I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
On page 8, line 28, after the word academy, delete the phrase, has the responsibility to, and replace it with the word shall. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is an amendment from Senator Chis Escudero and Senator Alan Peter Cayetano. On page 13, lines 17 to 25, after the word law, delete the following. Provided further that the chief of the PNP shall have the power to appoint the provincial director and the chief of police in cities and municipalities with proper endorsement by the chairman of the commission. Provided, finally, that the operational supervision and control of the local government units over the PNP units in their respective jurisdiction under RA number 6975 as amended shall be retained. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, we'd like to recognize the distinguished minority floor leader, Senator Mintel.
Mr. President, this amendment changes the existing rule, Mr. President,
No,
in the
no,
selection of the provincial director and the chief of police of city.
no, Mr. President, we maintain the status quo. That's why we delete this particular provision per amendments coming from both Senator Chis Escudero and Senator Alan Peter Cayetano.
So yes, I'm after the effect. So what will be the effect, Mr. President? That this bill introduces no new rule when it comes to
The selection.
selecting or designating now the police chief, the provincial director, and the chief of police in cities and municipalities. The rule that we will follow, even if we pass this bill as amended, would be what we are following right now.
Correct, Mr. President.
With that clarification, Mr. President, I have no objection.
Thank you very much. So the motion is carried. There being no objection, the amendment is carried.
On page 14, lines 3 to 6, delete the following. That the present chief of the PNP shall not benefit from the fixed term provided herein and shall be compulsorily retired upon reaching the compulsory retirement age, provided, finally, I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment is approved.
On page 15, lines 5 to 7, delete the following. The heads of the National Administrative and Operational Support Units shall have the rank of Police Brigadier General or higher. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 16, after line 32, insert a new paragraph that reads, there shall be police attachés occupying the position of police officer and diplomat with the rank of police colonel who shall represent the PNP and the DILG before police and law enforcement agencies in other jurisdictions, provided that the police attaché in Washington, District of Columbia, United States of America, shall have the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, Senator Pia Cayetano would like to be recognized. We recognize the lady senator.
Mr. President, may I just be clarified on that amendment? Sorry, I missed whose amendment that is.
There shall be
No,
police
whose amendment, Mr. President? Is it the committee amendment?
Yeah, individual amendment coming from yours truly.
Okay. May I be enlightened, Mr. President? Because when we travel abroad, sometimes there is a police, ano ba tawag? Attaché,
Police
no?
attaché.
Attaché. Is this in all? Where, Mr. President?
Only one shall have the rank of Police Brigadier General. It's in the United States, Mr. President, Your Honor.
No,
Yung
but-
sa Washington, D.C.
Yes, Mr. President, but the first line that says there shall be police attachés occupying the position of police officer and diplomat
With the rank of Police Colonel.
where? In where?
In other jurisdictions.
Yeah, ano nga ho yung jurisdictions na yun? What is other jurisdictions?
Ano ba, Pakistan?
All embassies, all consulates, paano ho ba yun? Kasi medyo marami ho yun, ah.
Yes, right now, Mr. President, Your Honor, we are maintaining a total of ilan? 7 police attachés all over the world, Mr. President, including U.S.
And what is the
including
proposal?
the United States.
And
So-
what is the proposal?
So the proposal is to make the police attaché in the United States to have the rank of Police Brigadier General, because right now, the one assigned there is only having the rank of Police Colonel. And correction, Mr. President. It was not stated in RA 6975 that police attachés will be manned by police. There will be police attachés in the other jurisdictions. But right now we are deploying police attachés, so we have to institutionalize it by this amendment.
Mr. President, thank you. But my question is, What do we mean by other jurisdictions? All over the world, in every country where we have an embassy, there will also be a police attaché? Is that the intention?
Not all over the world, Mr.
It's not-
President.
okay.
Only selected jurisdictions like United States.
His Honor mentioned 7, so is there a need to increase that to 7? And what is that need so that we can help craft language that is clear? Because we cannot delegate that authority if it's not clear. Like, who determines what are these other jurisdictions?
Kaya nga. 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Thank you.
1 minute. Mr. President, I just would like to respond to the query of Senator Pia Cayetano. At present, Mr. President, Your Honor, we have 8 police attachés maintained all over the world in coordination with the Department of Foreign Affairs. We have 2 in the United States, 1 in Los Angeles, and 1 in Washington, D.C. 1 in China, 1 in France, 1 in Indonesia, 1 in Malaysia, 1 in Saudi Arabia, 1 in Pakistan, and 1 in Thailand. The rank of these police attachés, Mr. President, are police colonel, except the United States, particularly Washington, D.C., which will hold the rank of Police Brigadier General.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no issue with the rank. My question has been, what do you mean by other jurisdictions? Kasi itong provision nyo states that there will be you will field more officers as police attachés in other jurisdiction. Ang tanong ko, sa buong mundo, dun ba sa allies natin, dun ba sa mga strategic locations, saan po tong other locations? It has to be more clearly defined. Yun lang naman po.
Other jurisdictions
As
means
determined by...
these eight jurisdictions, Mr. President. Itong 8 na ito.
Your Honor, what Mr. President, may I be clarified that what His Honor means is, at present, we do have 8 and we are just institutionalizing that 8 by including this provision.
Correct, Mr. President. Your
Would
Honor.
His Honor like to mention those 8? Because, again, as I said, when it just says in other jurisdictions, it presupposes that it's in some jurisdictions now and that there will be other jurisdictions where these positions would be filled. So I think an amendment is necessary to clarify, Mr.
Yes,
President.
I agree, Mr. President, Your Honor. We have to cite this, specify this in our amendment, and plus future,
Yes.
because the need of establishing a police attaché depends on the need of the OFWs in those territories.
Understand, Mr. President. And that's why the law should somehow define how the implementer of this law will determine what jurisdictions they will include. So as His Honor said, that will be determined where there are a lot of OFWs and they are needed there. Then perhaps that is the wording that should be included. In the
Yes.
following, not limited to the following, and possibly subject to style, other areas where the need for, I don't know, protection? I cannot provide the language, but if His Honor understands the point I am making, we are happy to review the language that His Honor feels would be best.
Yeah, I get the point of the good gentlewoman from Taguig and Pateros, Mr. President, and can I request, Mr. President, that we will just go back to
Yes,
this
of
particular
course. We can move
amendment
on.
And move on.
Of course.
After we have modified the wording subject to style.
Yes, may I just add one more point, Mr. President? Tama ho ba, Mr. President, that there are also attachés from the Department of Defense in these critical areas, and would those areas somehow overlap?
Correct, Mr. President. We have also defense attachés in those jurisdictions, but there is no overlapping of function because they concentrate on defense and the police attaché concentrates on police matters. Like, for example, our OFWs who are having problems with law enforcement or they are facing cases, these are the defense attachés cannot ably represent our government to these OFWs.
We understand, Mr. President. But with the example His Honor gave, would the position that needs to be filled now, would it not be a lawyer other than a police officer? Because if our kababayans are involved in a law enforcement operation and a case is filed against them, pulis ho ba ang kailangan nila o abogado?
Well, Mr. President, Your Honor, most of the time, because there should be police-to-police coordinations, the police agency of the host country and the police agency of the ones that were aggrieved, Mr. President. So, nag-uusap lang po sila. Nag-uusap po sila, police to police. So,
Are you
additional...
sure about that? Because in my mind and my humble mind, I'm not an expert, parang abogado ho yung kailangan yata ng OFW. Hindi ho ako aware na tinatawag police.
Well, iba yung legal attaché, iba rin yung police attaché, Mr. President, because iba po yung trabaho nila.
So, Mr. President, may I give an example? If in case an OFW is accused of, nangyari na ho to, no, na pinatay niya yung amo niya dahil nilapastangan siya, ang kailangan ng OFW natin is police doon sa ibang jurisdiction?
There are matters that has to be taken care of by the police.
Paano
Mr.
mo
President,
magko-coordinate yung police ho doon? Kasi sa pagkakaintindi ko, abogado ho ang kumakausap doon. Or they
Well,
work together.
there are times, Mr. President, that we need to coordinate with the police in the area, in the host country. So we need the police officer coming from us to coordinate with them.
Anyway, Mr. President, I take note of the answer of the good sponsor. I will also do some quick research because I am very happy to support Mr. President, but given the limited resources, sinisigurado ko lang na kung sino yung kailangan, kasi pwede ko rin hong i-propose na kung as a bill for the OFW committee, our committee on, what's the name of our committee, DMW? Migrant workers. To consider deploying lawyers other than police, given the limited resources. So anyway, I will hold that part of my amendment, Mr. President, and do a little bit of research. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, Mr. President.
President,
Senator Tolentino is
I
recognized.
just have one clarificatory question concerning the police attachés posted overseas. May we know from the gentleman if there is a fixed term or tenure insofar as the posting is concerned. Ganong katagal po sila? 2 years? 1 year? Kasi yung cycle ng promotion, Mr. President. Kasi dapat po nakalagay din na ikaw ay itatalagang police attaché in a certain jurisdiction for a period of 3 years, 2 years, or
Maximum of 3
only.
years, as practiced by the PNP right now, Mr. President.
Don't you think-
Maximum of 3 years.
Don't you think, Mr. President, this should be part of the law itself?
We can do it if we want to include that in this amendment.
For instance, in current diplomatic practice, the posting of an ambassador may not exceed 3 years.
Yes,
I think
Mr.
that's
President.
that's part of existing legislation, not just tradition. So, will the gentleman include a period, a maximum period, a ceiling, Mr. President?
Okay.
2 years?
Yes,
ano
Your
po?
Honor, Mr. President.
2 years or
3.
3 years? 3 years, Mr. President. That's my amendment, if the gentleman will accept.
Yeah, subject to style,
Subject
Mr.
to
President.
style. Thank you, Mr. President.
Joe, gawin niyo. Idagdag yan, 2 years.
So may I just ask our colleagues, Senator Bato, was it accepted by the body? There's no objection for Senator Pia? Or there's an amendment to the amendment? Oh, park muna, okay.
We are
Please
going to
proceed.
go back to the amendment of Senator
Okay.
Pia,
Please proceed.
Mr. President.
Please
Yeah.
proceed.
On page 15, excuse me, Mr. President. Dito na tayo na. On page 18, line 8, after the first article, delete the following, Chairman of the, I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments adopted.
On page 26, line 12, after the phrase Deputy Director, insert the following: for administration with the rank of Police Colonel, Deputy Director for Information and Technology Matters, who is a non-uniform personnel with at least salary grade 25. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On the same page, line 13, delete comma and the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On page 28, line 20, delete the word brigadier and replace it with major. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 29, after the word director, insert the following: with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 29, delete comma and the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 31, line 17, after the word administration, insert
Yes,
the following.
My dear colleague, we'd like to recognize Senator Pia Cayetano.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. President, my amendment is on page 29, lines 1 to 9.
Page
And
29.
for ease of understanding, I'll just read the whole paragraph. It's a new paragraph, Mr. President. Insert a new section which will read as follows. Subsection number 13, Recruitment and Selection Service. Headed by a director with the rank of Police Brigadier General, the Recruitment and Selection Service shall institutionalize the implementation of the PNP Recruitment and Selection Program to ensure the entry and equal representation of qualified and competent uniformed personnel in the PNP, regardless of sex, ethnic origin, religious beliefs, political affiliation, and social class, provided that the active recruitment all over the country shall be conducted. The director shall be assisted by a deputy director and a chief of staff, both with the rank of police colonel. We submit, Mr. President.
I wholeheartedly accept the said amendment, Mr. President.
There being no objection by the sponsor, then it means the amendment is accepted.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please proceed, the sponsor.
Saan na tayo ka na? On the same page, line 29, delete comma and the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments accepted. Approved.
On page 31, line 17.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I still have one more on page 29. I'm sorry, I
Sorry.
missed it.
Sorry,
Yes,
sorry.
please proceed, ma'am.
How can I-
This one, Mr. President, is on page 29. After line 9, insert a new paragraph, which will read as follows. Subparagraph 14, Futures Thinking Office. Headed by a director with the rank of Police Brigadier General, the Futures Thinking Office shall strategically anticipate, prepare, and train PNP personnel for emerging challenges, technological advancements, and evolving criminal patterns and other future scenarios that will enhance public order and safety and law enforcement effectiveness. Next paragraph. Director shall be assisted by a multidisciplinary team with expertise in areas such as futures thinking, criminology, technology, foresight methodologies, and strategic planning. We submit, Mr. President.
I accept, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I leave it to His Honor if it is his desire that this be headed by a director with the rank of Police Brigadier General. Medyo kayo po ang expert dyan kung anong level of expertise ang kailangan, Mr. President, or anong level of seniority
It should
ang
be
kailangan.
Police Brigadier General,
Thank you, Mr.
Your
President.
Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the amendment was accepted by the sponsor. Please proceed.
On page 31, line 17, the word administration, insert the following: with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 18, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
On page 31, line 26, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 27, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 32, line 3, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 4, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 32, line 16, after the word safety, insert the following, provided that the Aviation Security Group shall have concurrent jurisdiction and authority with all airport police or security group over airport premises in the country. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 32, line 17, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 18, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. So, I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 25, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President, the following amendment is from Senator Alan Peter Cayetano. On page 33, delete the entire paragraph found in lines 14 to 17 and replace it with, the director shall be assisted by a deputy director for administration with the rank of Police Brigadier General and a deputy director for operations and chief of staff, both with the rank of police colonel, provided that, notwithstanding any law or rule to the contrary, there shall be a sufficient number of personnel at the Regional Forensic Unit, National Capital Region, adjusted as needed to the duties and responsibilities of the unit and to the demand for forensic services in the region as determined by the Chief of the PNP. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 25, after the word administration, insert the following, with the rank of Police Brigadier General. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 26, delete the word all and replace it with the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is an amendment from Senator Risa Hontiveros. On page 35, line 21, insert a new paragraph that reads, the group shall closely coordinate with the PNP Internal Affairs Service to ensure that the proper administrative charges are filed against PNP personnel involved in illicit acts. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 36, lines 15 to 16, after the word members, delete the following, assigned in Metropolitan Manila, chartered cities, and first-class municipalities. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is a joint amendment by this representation and Senator Alan Peter Cayetano. On page 36, line 27, after the word year, insert the following, provided further that the uniformed personnel who have less than 1 year in the service upon the effectivity of this act shall have the option to compulsorily retire at the age of 56. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved. Your Honor, just a question. So this we already inserted the increase in age to 57.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, to be at par with the armed
Armed
forces.
Forces of the Philippines.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Pimentel is recognized.
Just to be very clear on the last amendment, we already approved We are referring to uniformed personnel who would have less than a year of service left when,
Yes,
when
yes,
this
Mr.
becomes
President.
effective.
Yeah.
If it's an option, Mr. President, why are we using the word option to compulsorily retire, Mr. President?
Option to compulsorily retire, Mr. President,
If it's an option, it does not belong to the concept of compulsion, Mr. President. So what do we want here to happen? That if the uniformed personnel who will have less than a year left in their less than a year in service before reaching the age of 56, are those the people covered?
yes, Mr.
Upon
President.
effective, shall have the option to retire.
Yes.
Okay, that's what we want, Mr. President. So anyway, at any rate, Mr. President, with the permission of our sponsor, after the period of amendment, we will ask for a clean copy. Okay lang ba yun? So we can revisit if we have captured what we want in that, if it's very clear, this one.
Yes,
this
Mr.
one.
President.
Anyway, we have already approved this, Mr. President. Just calling the attention, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, please proceed, Ma'am Risa. Our distinguished colleague.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Clarification to the good chair and sponsor about an anterior amendment. The good sponsor already read this representation's amendment to page 35 after line 20. I'd just like to clarify, Mr. President, with the good sponsor, it had been my understanding that the proposed amendment that would be accepted by the good sponsor, would read, "The group shall closely coordinate with the PNP Internal Affairs Service to ensure that the proper administrative and/or criminal charges are filed against PNP personnel involved in illicit acts." What the good sponsor read was to ensure that the proper administrative charges are filed again. So I'd just like to clarify, Mr. President, with the good sponsor, kung ano po yung proposed amendment ng representasyong ito na tinanggap nila.
Well, we can ano niya, no problem, Mr. President, Your Honor, we can add the criminal charges.
And/or criminal
And or,
charges.
yeah, no
good
problem.
sponsor.
I accept.
Dagan salamat. Salamat kayo, Mr. President.
Thank you. The amendment's accepted for the record. So, was this an amendment or an amendment earlier made? Yes, could you clarify, Minority Floor Leader?
Yes, it appears that it's an amendment to the amendment
Amendment.
because hindi lang na nagkukulang yung wording sa Mr. President.
Okay. Subject
So,
to style?
Subject to style.
Subject to style, and anyway, we're gonna have a clean copy tonight so that tomorrow we can review again. Please proceed, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. On page 39, line 3, after the acronym PNP, insert the following: provided that the order of preventive suspension issued by the aforementioned officers may be modified or reversed by their immediate supervisors. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments accepted. Approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is an amendment from Senator Risa Hontiveros. On page 39, line 7, insert a new section which will contain amendments to Section 39 of Republic Act Number 8551 to wit. Section 15, Section 39 of Republic Act Number 8551 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 39, Creation, Powers, and Functions. An Internal Affairs Service of the PNP is hereby created under the office of the Chief of the PNP, which shall, the full text of the amendments is being shown on the screen. It seeks to insert the phrase under the office of the Chief of the PNP to indicate where the IAS will be in the PNP organizational structure. It also seeks to amend subparagraph E to mandate IAS to closely coordinate with the Integrity and Monitoring Enforcement Group, file the proper criminal cases against erring PNP members. This amendment also touches on the list of cases where IAS shall conduct automatic investigation, such as, number 1, under subparagraph B, we add the phrase during, in connection with, or as a result of the conduct of a police operation. Number 2, under subparagraph D, we add where the suspect dies or is seriously injured. And number 3, there is a new subparagraph F, incidents where a police personnel is allegedly involved in the crimes including murder, kidnapping, and serious illegal detention, robbery, abuse of, or violence against women or children, trafficking in persons, or any other crime involving moral turpitude, subject to style. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
After the new Section 15, insert a Section 16 to read as follows. Section 16, Section 40 of Republic Act Number 8551 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 40, Organization, National, Regional, and Provincial Offices of the Internal Affairs shall be established. Internal Affairs Service shall be headed by an Inspector General who shall be assisted by a Deputy Inspector General with the rank of Police Major General. The Regional Internal Affairs Offices shall be headed by a Regional Director with the rank of Police Brigadier General, while the Provincial Offices shall be headed by a Provincial Director, provided that the head of the Internal Affairs Service shall be a civilian who shall meet the qualification requirements provided herein. The Commission shall establish a rationalized staffing pattern in the reorganization plan as provided for in Section 13 hereof. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendment, amendment is approved.
After the new Section 16, insert a new Section 17 to read as follows. Section 41, Section 17, Section 41 of Republic Act Number 8551 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 41, Appointments. The Inspector General shall be appointed by the President upon the recommendation of the Chief of the PNP and duly endorsed by the Commission, and shall be coterminous with the appointing authority without reappointment or extension unless earlier removed from office for just cause. Appointments of personnel who shall occupy various positions shall be made by the Inspector General and shall be based on the established career pattern and criteria to be promulgated by the Commission. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
After the new Section 17, insert a new Section 18 to read as follows. Section 18, Applicability. The provisions of this Act shall have retroactive effect on the rights and benefits granted by virtue of appointment, promotion, or retirement prior to its effectivity. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
Renumber all sections accordingly, subject to style. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
That would be all, Mr. President. Thank you,
All
Mr.
the
President.
amendments subject to style, so that we can,
okay, Mr.
Secretariat can review to make sure that we have no styling problems. And to issue a clean copy by tomorrow, so that
Yes,
we
Mr.
can
President.
approve this on second reading.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, our distinguished minority floor leader is recognized. Senator Coco Pimentel.
With the permission of our sponsor, if I can just ask a question on one of the early amendments, Mr. President, yung sa page 7, line 20, just so that nasa records po, we inserted before the word operational, page 7, line 20, before the word operational, we inserted administrative and. So what would be the big difference, Mr. President?
The big difference, Mr. President, right now, the EPCs are only having operational control over the existing regional mobile force battalions. So hanggang deployment lang sila, limited to deployment of these units. But administratively, wala silang control. They are not the ones appointing for people who will man the regional mobile force battalion. So kulang yung power nila, Mr. President, hanggang operational lang. So sayang yung kanilang rango na 3-star general kung ang kanilang powers and responsibilities are not commensurate to the rank that they are having. So minabuti po natin na including administrative powers, ibigay na rin sa kanila para sila na ang maghanap, mag-determine kung sino mga tao na i-recruit nila to man the Regional Mobile Force Battalion, Mr. President.
So, sino pong natanggalan natin nung administrative power na yon?
The Regional Director, Mr. President.
Regional.
Because right now, the Regional Directors are the one appointing the new members of the Regional Mobile Force Battalion.
Okay, so and that's very clear, Mr. President. Wala namang, hindi tayo magkakaroon ng turf war dito na
There's no top war.
baka may wording tayo na naiwan pa yung administrative power sa regional director.
Yeah, there's no top war here, Mr.
So,
President.
klaro na naangat na natin dun sa APC.
Yes, Mr. President, because if you do not include the administrative powers, these 3-star generals heading the EPCs cannot discipline administratively this erring personnel of the Regional Mobile Force Battalion. Hanggang deployment lang sila. Pero pag ito'y nagluluko, ito'y gumawa ng kalukuhan, ang administrative powers belong to the Regional Director. So minabuti natin na i-elevate to the APC.
Ang hinahanap ko actually, Mr. President, is yung counterpart amendment na klinaro na inalis naman natin sa regional director yung administrative power. Kasi siningit, we just inserted 2 words, administrative and then sabi natin, lumipat na ngayon yung administrative power from the regional to the APC. But wala ba tayong corresponding amendment to clarify na tinanggal na nga natin yung administrative powers ng regional?
There's none, Mr. President, because there's no need, Mr. President, because it is understood that if we give the power, administrative powers to these APCs, APC commanders, it is already removed from the regional directors.
Okay, so what law gave the power to the regional directors in the first place, Mr. President?
RA 6975. It's RA 6975, Mr. President.
Anyway, we just make sure, Mr. President, na walang ambiguity, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anyway, we will ask for a clean copy.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Sessions, yes, Senator Tolentinos.
Just one follow-up germane question. May I know from the good sponsor, if there are provisions as being submitted right now for amendments that would include special police districts? Because yes, police districts. Because I recall, Mr. President, that I was the one who sponsored the creation of a Metro Davao Police Force. Is this included in the measure? Is this included in the measure? It's a special law headed by a 1-star general, Mr. President. So, for purposes of consistency, Mr. President, I think that should likewise be mentioned as part of this measure.
Mr. President, at the metropolitan level, there shall be a district office headed by a district director. So,
With the rank of...
with the at the provincial headed by district director, and the district director is having the rank of 1-star general, brigadier general. So it follows that the metropolitan Davao
Police District is
police
covered,
district
is covered by this
covered by
measure.
this general provision, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you,
Mr.
Majority Leader.
President, to allow our colleagues, Mr. President, to study further, a lot of our colleagues back there are asking for a clean copy. May I just move that we suspend right now the consideration of Senate Bill number 2449. So move,
Yes,
Mr.
there
President.
being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask for a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended for 1 minute.
President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2386 under Committee Report number 99. This bill pertains to the Real Property Valuation and Assessment Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this bill is that we are in the period of interpellation. With that, I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to continue with this interpellation, our Minority Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel.
Our distinguished sponsor, Senator Wing Gatchalian of the City of Valenzuela, and our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and as stated by our acting, the Assistant Majority Leader, we are continuing with our interpellation. So, I think the last time, Mr. President, sabi yun, November, December, Christmas, ano yata yun?
Christmas party,
Yeah,
Mr.
Christmas
President.
party day.
Before the
Yes.
Christmas party, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. So, before the People's Initiative consciousness, Mr.
Bruhaha,
President, we
Mr.
were not
President.
conscious about any People's Initiative that time, Mr.
Masaya pa
President.
tayo.
Before the PI Bruhaha, Mr. President.
So I think since the BLGF personnel were there, I also wanted to ask, are they present now?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes,
they're
di ba, I
present.
wanted to ask what would be the budgetary implication of this bill? Kasi as I recall it, if this bill becomes law, we will have to expand the manpower, the complement of BLGF, and they will do a lot of coordinating activities, Mr. President. So,
Yes, Mr. President.
in short, may we have may we have an idea on the budgetary implication of our bill, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Let me just get my notes, Mr. President. Yeah. Mr. President, we ran some simulation, and the budgetary allocation per year is 66 million, Mr. President, for the additional 66 million for the BLGF, Mr. President. This will cover the expanded role of the BLGF and the supervisory as well as monitoring responsibilities, Mr. President.
Will this bill require the BLGF to be always in constant touch with each LGU, including municipalities? Di ba, we have at more than 1,400 municipalities.
Well, Mr. President, in practice, based on my experience, they are in constant touch and they are reachable when LGUs need advice, especially on improving their local tax collections, Mr. President. Based on my experience, the BLGF's direction is to empower our local government units. So the empower in terms of local tax collection so that they will be independent as much as possible from national grants or national allocations, Mr. President.
So, but then we reach this conclusion that we need this bill, Mr. President. So, what has happened? How come parang BLGF has failed in its role to help the local governments increase their local revenues through efficient use of local taxation, Mr. President?
Well, Mr.
Kasi
President.
umabot pa tayo sa we need this bill to help them, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, I think one of the fundamental problems of real property collection, Mr. President, is the updating of the schedule of market values because it's not being periodically updated, as well as the enactment of the local tax ordinances that is connected to the updating of schedule of market value. So in other words, even though the BLGF provides advice, provides direction, but a lot of because of local autonomy, a lot of the decisions still lie within the mayor as well as the local sanggunian, Mr. President.
Yes, that's why we thought of this bill, Mr. President. Pero as I pointed out the last time, di ba, we want this bill because this will help the local government units improve their revenues through improved RPT collections. But at the same time, we also empower them to avoid, so that they can take measures in order to avoid any effect in their RPT collections, Mr. President. So why? Di ba the three factors?
Yes, Mr. President.
Sabi natin last time, the LGU can adjust the two of the
Yes,
three.
the assessment level and the
to-
tax rates.
Yes, so that the taxpayer, the real property taxpayer, will not feel the
Yes.
effect of the bill. So
The tax due will remain the same,
so,
Mr. President.
Yes, I'm back to my basic question, Mr. President. Then why are we undergoing this exercise, Mr. President, or experiment, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, under the local government code, the LGUs are mandated to revise to conduct general revision, Mr. President. But the fundamental basis for the general revision is the schedule of market values. And under the local government code, and this is an opinion from the BLGF, that the local government can, the minimum requirement for local governments to update their schedule of market value is not more than once every 3 years. So a lot of our local governments do not update their schedule of market values. So, and because of that, the schedule of market values are not realistic anymore compared to the actual market values. And because of that, they don't undertake revision because since they don't update their schedule of market values, there's no point of conducting general revision as well, Mr. President. So a lot of our LGUs got stuck in very ancient market values, Mr. President, and that depresses the local tax collection of the local government units, Mr. President. So in basic terms, Mr. President, the local government units are not updating their schedule of market values, and that's the aim of this bill, Mr. President.
The obligation to undertake a general revision, in what section is that found of the local government code,
212?
Mr. President?
219, Mr.
219.
President.
Can I will read 219. General revision of assessment and property classification. The provincial, city, or municipal assessor shall undertake a general revision of real property assessments within 2 years after the effectivity of this code and every 3 years thereafter. So that is the obligation or the duty that we are citing, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, for general revision, Mr.
Kaya
President.
nga, I want to now understand what is the meaning of general revision of real property assessments. Are we, which of the three factors does this section refer to, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, the general revision of assessment and property classification, in simple terms, this is the activity wherein the local government issues the actual tax declaration already, one by one, Mr. President. That's why the general revision takes time. But the basis of that general revision, Mr. President, are the schedule of market values as well as the assessment levels and the tax rates that will be enacted through an ordinance, Mr. President. So in other words, even though the LGUs want to revise, undertake a general revision, they still have to update their schedule of market values because that's one of the most important value in that formula, Mr. President.
So, from our sponsor, do I understand that Section 219 of the local code, the result of this, if this is observed, is the issuance of new updated tax declarations per real property owner?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
Yes.
What is found in the tax declaration? We find there the assessment level, and we find there the
The-
tax
we-
rate.
We
But
find there the market value, and then the assessment value, and then they will have the assessment, I think we have slide 6. This is actual, no? Yeah, we can flash on the side, on the slide, Mr. President, a sample of a tax
deck.
declaration,
Yes,
so
Mr.
that will be guided accordingly. Slide, ano? 16. So we will see here, Mr. President, the
Okay.
most important, of course, aside from the name and the address, will be the classification, whether residential, commercial, industrial, and then you have the area, and then the market value, Mr. President. And then there's also actual use, no? Because sometimes the classification is not in line with the actual use, and the assessors can use the actual use as a basis for their assessment, and then the assessment level, and then you will have now the assessed value. So that is the basis for the tax due, Mr. President.
Yes, so Mr. President, we have been shown images of actual tax declarations of real property, which is the end result of a general revision. Tama, no? Ito po. So, the classification of the real property will be indicated plus the market value and assessment level, and from the assessment level, we can determine the assessed value. But the real property tax due is not found in the tax declaration. Tama? Wala po doon.
No,
Wala po.
Mr. President.
Ha? Nandun?
Wait,
wala
Mr.
po.
President. Hold on, Mr. President.
Kasi iba yun. Bibigyan kaya ng
Tax due, wala. I think it will be. Yeah, Mr. President, no, Mr. President, it's not found in the tax declaration, Mr. President.
Correct, okay. Sige po.
It's normally in practice, the taxpayer will go to the treasurer's office to ask for a computation, but there's a term for that. It's
Andun yung assessment
they go to the treasurer's office to ask for a computation of their due.
Yes.
In that computation will contain the tax due. If they have past dues, it will also contain the past dues. Of course, computation of penalties and interest if there are, and that will be the basis for the payment of their taxes for real property.
Oh, assessment.
You have a bigger picture of that. Bigger picture.
So, Mr. President, the market value as of today, under present law, is determined by the sanggunian.
Sir,
No one, with that one, in our sample tax declaration, there is a classification of the land area, and then we have a market value. So, is that market value determined by the sanggunian under present law, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. That is the schedule of market value
Correct.
that is being submitted by the assessor, Mr. President. They have to update that supposedly regularly, Mr. President.
So kasama po yan sa general revision under section 219
Yes, Mr.
as read
President.
by ours.
Correct.
So
Because
our-
in the local government code, if you go to section 212, the preparation for schedule of preparation of schedule of market values, Mr. President. Before any general revision of property assessment is made pursuant to provisions of this title, there shall be prepared a schedule of fair market value by the province, city, and municipal assessors, Mr. President. So in other words, the basis for the general revision is the schedule of market values, Mr. President.
Correct. Sa ngayon, market value is determined by the sanggunian of the LGU. Under our bill, alisin natin yung power na yon sa market value.
Yes, Mr. President.
Opo.
Yeah.
At
Only the approval, but the preparation will still be undertaken by the local government units. So the assessor will still collect data,
yeah, but
will update the schedule of market value based on the Philippine valuation standards. So, and after that, they will submit a annual collection, no? Annual target collection of the local government unit, so that the sanggunians will be guided on how much their target collection for real property for the next year and the years to come, Mr. President.
sino po nag-set nung target?
It's normally a proposal coming from the assessor's office, Mr. President. It's called
Yeah,
tax
the-
impact report.
The assessor is the employee of the LGU.
Yes, Mr. President.
Are we retaining that in our bill?
Yes, Mr. President.
And yet, so these are LGU officials, and yet, pag mag-collaborate na si assessor and si sanggunian, yung schedule of market values nila will be subject to approval by the Secretary of the Department of Finance. That's in our bill, tama?
Yes, Mr. President. Insofar as the standards are concerned, Mr. President, so we made it very clear. We made it very clear that the Secretary of Finance will be limited to the compliance to the Philippine valuation standards. Insofar as the value is concerned, we will not have any say on the values, Mr. President.
Let us now imagine a situation where the Secretary of Finance disagrees with the work of the sanggunian. So what would be the sample reasons to be given by the DOF why he or she is disapproving the LGU ordinance on the schedule of market values? What would be some sample grounds, Mr. President?
But, Mr. President, in the Philippine valuation standards, there are methodologies in terms of gathering information, gathering data, computation, consultation. There's a list of standards on how these are being practiced. So, for example, if the local government units will not follow the standards, for example, shortcut lang siya, will get, hindi siya nag market survey, or the local government units will only rely on one piece of information, then that's a ground or a violation of the standards promulgated by the BLGF. And that can be a ground for the disapproval of the schedule of schedule market value, SMVs.
Ito pong Philippine Valuation Standards, inform ako ng staff ko, is isang libro ang kapal nito. So our present assessors are familiar with this
Yes, Mr.
standards
President,
right
because-
now, right? Right
Because,
now.
Mr. President, our assessors are also professionals already. No? They have to get their license under the PRC. In the past, I remember before, they're just mere practitioners, no? And they undergo very basic training. But after the law that governs the profession, they became a professional, Mr. President. The RESA law, Mr. President.
What's the name?
The Real Estate Service Act. When was it? 2009, Mr. President.
Real estates, okay.
Yeah, so
kaya
they're
nga, okay.
governed. They now have to be licensed in order to be assessors, Mr. President.
So they are familiar with the Philippine valuation
Yes, Mr. President.
standards. Okay. So if the LGU wants to comply with the PVS in good faith, meron kayo siyang extra expenses na ma-incur?
Mr. President, what I can see, the most important aspect will be the assurance that their assessors are licensed, Mr. President. And that means they have to undergo professional training, as well as it's now a course in many of our universities, Mr. President. So it's not enough that you are, let's say, an accountant, a CPA. You have to go through a professional course to be licensed assessor, Mr. President.
Yes, and then you are now an assessor, and then your LGU really wants to comply in good faith with the PVS. So, isang libro daw po yun. Baka yung mga survey, market survey,
Correct,
ano
yeah.
kaya. What would be the additional expenses we can anticipate an LGU to incur, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, I was informed by the BLGF that they have regular trainings for the assessors as well as the entire real property division of the LGUs. So typically in an LGU, like for example in Valenzuela, we have about a head assessor, and then we have about 3 or 4 licensed assessors. The rest are staff and support staff to the assessor. And the BLGF undertakes training of all the real property office personnel, Mr. President. So the cost will be the regular training. If the LGU desires to send their personnel to school to get their license,
May mga
that's
steps
additional
po,
school.
yung mga steps, yung mga studies na required, may surveys ba na required? I mean, so yung nasa isang libro po yan, yung Philippine Valuation Standards.
Yeah, isang libro siya, Mr. President.
Na dapat mag-comply, di ba?
Yes, Mr.
Hindi.
President.
So,
So they're trained to it's part of their curriculum.
Yes. And then my point, Mr. President, is hindi naman, yes, kung may additional expenses sa munisipyo, for example, would it be by the millions ang additional expenses if they really want to comply with the Philippine Valuation Standards? Or meron lang incidental expenses na hindi naman siguro by the millions?
Yeah, the training yun Yung training
May
Well, Mr.
may mga studies,
Yung valuation standard, what can it?
questionnaire, ano ba mga
Yeah, but that's part of the curriculum. That's part of the curriculum. Yeah. Well, Mr. President, being professionals, they have regular mandatory continuing education, and typically that's the cost of the government, the LGU, Mr. President. And part of the mandatory continuing education is updating of their know-how on the standards, getting familiar with new concepts, and knowing what the international appraisers and valuation is being conducted abroad, Mr. President.
So, hindi, Mr. President, kung ganyan lang pala kadali yan, it's all about the qualification of the assessor, then how come LGUs are not complying with our Section 219?
Mr. President, the two things that I during the analysis of this bill. Number one, Mr. President, is the LGUs are not updating their schedule of market values. Their assessors know what to do because now it's required that assessors are licensed assessors. No? But knowing what to do and doing it obviously are different. And most LGUs don't update their schedule of market values because there's no requirement in the local government code to update it regularly, Mr. President. That's number one. And number two, Mr.
Akala ko sa
President,
219, Mr. President, every 3 years thereafter.
the revision, Mr. President.
Ah.
The general revision is being conducted every 3 years, but the schedule of market value, there's no strict requirement on how often you update your schedule of market
So
value.
even if they do the general revision, they retain the
Yes.
retain the old
The old
schedule.
one, Mr.
Okay,
President.
I
And
get it.
to be honest, Mr. President, the practice is normally they touch on the schedule of market values, meaning they increase it or sometimes decrease it, but they don't touch the other variables, such as the assessed value and the tax rates. And of course, when you touch the schedule of market values, it becomes political, no? Because people see the actual values. But in reality, they can lower down the assessed value and the tax rates so that the tax due will be the same. So most LGUs are hesitant in terms of touching the schedule of market values because that's what people see and understand.
Hindi po ba mas political is the real property tax due? Kasi yun talaga,
Yun talaga,
yun ang money
oo.
out eh. Pero actually, akala ko ba one of the reasons is asset ito. Binibigyan namin ng tunay na value yung asset mo. Hindi ka ba maging happy nun na tumaas yung asset mo? At saka, in our last interpellation, akala ko ba one of the purposes din dito is para kung ma-expropriate
Yeah.
yung property mo, at least reflected yung real value ng property mo,
Actually,
Mr. President. So,
that-
is it really that politically sensitive yung schedule of market values o yung real property tax due ang mas politically sensitive?
From my
Mr. President?
experience, Mr. President, ang taxpayer at the local level, and I'm sure Senator JV and Senator Tolentino will know this, dual personality. Magtitipid sila sa pagbabayad ng amilyar, pero paghihiram sila sa bangko, yung malaking valuation ang gagamitin nila so that they can get a bigger loan. It's a typical scenario in the local government unit, Mr. President.
Okay.
As-
Takot lang sila sa schedule of market values because sa mind nila yung flow chart, this will now lead to a higher real property tax
Correct,
due.
correct. That's why banks,
But,
typically banks, Mr. President, they don't use tax declaration or the schedule of market values because they know it's undervalued.
Yes,
At the local level. Normally, they require professional appraisers to appraise the property, Mr. President.
Yeah, is it one of the objectives of this bill that given a piece of property, when it is appraised by an independent property appraiser, the amount that he or she will come up with should look like the amount in the schedule.
More or
of
less,
market
Mr.
values. That's
President.
the idea.
Because in our hearing, Mr. President, and consultative meeting that we conducted, the appraisers also use the Philippine valuation standards. Because the Philippine valuation standards is based on the international valuation standards that all appraisers follow. So meaning if you engage a local appraiser here and they appraise your property, you can use that appraisal report and borrow from an international bank. And they will recognize that because of the international valuation standard, Mr. President. So it's a global practice, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, itong bill na ito will allow LGUs to implement countermeasures so that the real property tax due will not really increase, and because that is very politically sensitive. But then if the schedule of market values at the local level is also sensitive, and yet that schedule is not used in the determination of the capital gains tax in case of transactions over that piece of land. Ibang value ang ano eh.
Correct,
Oh,
Mr.
ibang
President.
capital gains tax, ano pa ba,
Correct,
documentary
Mr. President.
stamp tax siguro, iba pa, even sa 2% for loan application sa banko, ibang
Yes, Mr.
document and value ang gagamitin. Then why are we doing this, involving forcing local government units to do a politically sensitive act, and yet at the same time empower them to lessen the impact of that politically sensitive act, Mr. President?
That's why, Mr. President, we're changing the paradigm. We are depoliticizing the updating of schedule of market values, and instead transferring the political aspect to the assessment levels and the tax rates. And it will yield the same, Mr. President. But we're just changing the paradigm on how local governments compute tax due. At the end of the day, you're absolutely correct. At the end of the day, they should look at the tax due. And there are three levers or three variables that they can use in order to reach the same tax due. And then we're just changing that paradigm, Mr. President. And I demonstrated in the past, we ran simulations, for example, in Valenzuela, that we can achieve the same tax due as long as you lower down the assessment levels and the tax rates.
The sponsors used City of Valenzuela as an example. So in the City of Valenzuela, revised na po yung schedule of market values?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr.
And
President.
you've used the Philippine valuation standards?
Yes, Mr. President.
So if we hire an independent third-party property appraiser to appraise a value of land in Valenzuela, yung number na he or she will come up with, ibangga natin sa tax deck. They will
More or
be-
less, Mr.
they will
President.
they will be in the same vicinity. Mr.
More or
President.
less, Mr. President, plus or minus
Yeah, plus
maybe
or
10%, Mr. President,
yes,
but more or
Mr.
less, more or less.
So congratulations to the city of Valenzuela, and then there was no political upheaval in
No.
city of
Meron rin, Mr. President.
may-
Meron rin, Mr. President.
nakareklamo
It was a long process. In fact, I remember when I was a mayor, I took out the discounts because in the local government code you can offer discounts, but the discounts what? 20%? Yeah, 20% for prompt payment. I removed that, Mr. President, because I told them it's better to remove that and get 20% rather than increase the schedule of market value. But that took us almost, maybe 1 or 2 years to explain to our constituents. It's really very difficult, and that's why we are changing the paradigm by depoliticizing the schedule of market values. But we will still empower the local government units the capability to lower down the other variables, Mr. President.
Tama-tama, Mr. President, January pa ngayon. Ngayon, kung magbayad yata ngayon, may discount, di ba?
Oo. Sa Valenzuela, wala po, Mr.
Karamihan
President.
ng LGUs, opo, may discount pagka. So, yung mga nakikinig sa atin na nalimutan
Yeah,
na
in
may,
most
na may
LGUs,
RPT. may bayaran.
Yeah, in most LGUs, may advance payment discount of 20%. 20% of 20%.
And then, ulitin ko po, we have the support of the local government units expressed through their associations.
Yes, Mr. President,
Hindi, opo, nabanggit nyo na po yan, pero hindi ba parang secretary lang ang pumunta o representative? Mr.
yeah, but we
President?
requested the leadership to issue a letter, Mr. President.
So we have it.
Yeah, we have it already, Mr. President.
All the ano bang tawag mo doon?
The ULAP, Mr.
The
President.
associations, not only ULAP, Mr. President, kasi ULAP would be
The umbrella
ng
organization.
lahat na yan but
Yeah.
you have the League of Governors, League of Cities, League of Municipalities, Mr. President. Meron po lahat yon.
Not individually, Mr. President. We tapped ULAP being the umbrella organization of all local government units. And their constituents are the local government units, Mr. President. So we tapped ULAP. But we also invited the other components, local government components, to attend. And I didn't hear any opposition or objection to the proposed measure, Mr. President. The only recommendation that they made is to make it, the general revision, make it longer, give them enough time, and also support in terms of budget and digitalization, Mr. President, which we incorporated in the bill.
Meron pong part of the records naman of the committee na yung communication ng ULAP.
Yes, Mr. President.
Signed by who, Mr. President?
Mr. President, this one is signed by the Executive Director, Mr. President, dated October 17, 2023.
Sino po yun?
Ms. Eileen Leicano, Mr. President.
But the ED is not a local chief executive, no, Mr. President?
No, Mr. President. But I'm sure this has the imprimatur and the permission of their leadership, Mr. President.
Is there a resolution of the board, Mr. President?
Let me get our notes, Mr. President, and to
Sige po.
reflect it over
Apo.
in the records, Mr. President.
Sige, while you're looking at the notes, Mr. President, can I ask another question, Mr. President? Kasi wala yan. So, Mr. President, another topic. Is there an international valuation standard, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
So, meron din Philippine valuation standard. So, related ba yung dalawa?
Yes, Mr. President.
So we derived the PVS from the IVS?
Yes, Mr. President.
And which body issued the IVS?
It's a International Valuation Standards Council.
Do we know who are the personalities behind this council? Kasi in effect, yung issuances nila will find their way to our LGUs through this bill. International Valuation Standards, Philippine Valuation Standards, then local ordinance.
Yes, Mr.
Sino
President.
po sila? Sino to mga to na pinagtitiwalaan po natin? Is this a treaty? Are we a member of this council because of a treaty?
No, it's not a treaty, Mr. President, but we're a member of, let me get the exact information, Mr. President.
Europe Local Government Finance and Asian Development Bank.
But we're but give me the, yeah, but give me the, yung write-up. Ano kayo ginawa?
Makes sense naman.
I'll get the exact write-up, Mr. President.
Ano sagot niya?
Hindi in description ng IBS. Yeah, but give me the description. Give me the description. Yan, meron pa.
And then after this, take that power na lang ng Secretary.
Well, Mr. President, the International Valuation Standards Council, the IVSC, facilitates the collaboration and cooperation among its member organizations who are valuation service providers, financial services, businesses, regulators, international bodies, and academic institutions. The IVSC consists of more than 100 member organizations from around the world and is supported by numerous sponsors who are leaders in the valuation field. And the Bureau of Local Government Finance is a member and was accepted in March 2018 as an institutional member of the International Valuation Standards Council.
Okay, that's good, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
It's a bureau of our government, Mr. President, which is a member. And how was this council put up, Mr. President? By treaty, or are we a founding member, or we just joined the council, Mr. President?
We're not, we're an institutional member, Mr. President.
Yes, we are institutional member. So were we already a member at the founding of this group, Mr. President? We joined it, or did we join it when it was already an existing group, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. We joined it when it's already an existing group, Mr.
Do
President.
we have the basic background of the group? Who put up this group, Mr. President?
Here, Mr. President. The International Valuation Standards, well, let me describe first the International Valuation Standards. The International Valuation Standards is the overarching standards adopted, followed by members of the International Valuation Standards Council. The International Valuation Standards Council is an independent global standard setter for the valuation profession. The IVSC has more than 200 member organizations operating in 137 countries worldwide. The objective of the IVS is to increase the confidence and trust of users of valuation services by establishing transparent and consistent valuation practices, Mr. President.
So may we get the, let's say, prominent members or even member states of the IVSC, Mr. President? Mostly Western ba? Western societies, the US and Europe, ganun po ba?
Let me get the exact membership, Mr. President, the most prominent one.
Then my next question would be, who are the prominent non-members, Mr. President? Para makita natin yung point of view. Ano yung point of view?
Just give me the prominent non-members, Mr.
Also
President.
members and non-members also, Mr. President. Just to find out, Mr. President, if the organization has a certain bias, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President,
Or,
well, just getting the exact
way of looking at things, Mr. President.
here. For example, Mr. President, I'm just going to name a few here. In Singapore, the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore, the Singapore Economic Development Board,
Apo.
The International Finance Corporation or World Bank, International Association of Assessing Officers. These are international members.
Are there Chinese entities members, Russian, Mr. President?
Uzbekistan, Mr. President, Association of Appraisal Organization of Uzbekistan.
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 Yes, sir.
So, Mr. President, some more members. I'm just going through the more prominent ones, Mr. President.
So, yes, Mr. President, so hindi pala countries ang members nito? Ano pala?
Organizations. Mr.
Organizations
President.
pala. Opo,
Well,
opo.
some of them are country government agencies,
Yes, opo,
Mr.
opo.
President. So, most of them, actually. So, I'm just going
Sige
through
po.
the most prominent, Mr. President.
So the international valuation standards, as far as we know, are already being observed in how many state jurisdictions? Siguro countries, pwede naman siguro pag-usapan, countries po, no? Kung saan sila applicable.
137 countries worldwide, Mr. President.
Observe the international valuation standards. So, lagay na lang natin sa mga close to 55, kasi 193 yata ang United Nations. So, mga 56 ang countries po ang hindi nag-observe po nito.
Yeah. Well, Mr. President, I went through it, the list. I don't see China in the list, Mr. President.
So, are we counting the Philippines already as one of the countries observing it now, right now? Even without this law, are we considered as
Yes, Mr.
still
President.
already observing
Yes,
it?
Mr. President.
Sige po, Mr. President, matagal na rin kasi itong pending, so one last,
Yeah, Mr. President, before we continue, let me just put on record the letter of the ULAP signed by their Executive Director, Eileen Laicano, dated October 17, 2023. And let me just put on record their statement of support. The Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines, ULAP, as the umbrella organization representing all leagues of local government units and locally elected officials in the country, supports the enactment of a Real Property Valuation and Assessment Reform Act to enhance the revenue-generating capabilities of local governments and their ability to mobilize resources in order to meet their diverse fiscal requirements. And then it goes through some of the recommendations to improve the bill, Mr. President. And we will get the corresponding resolution that triggered this letter, Mr. President, and share it to the good minority leader.
sige po, thank you. Siguro, but this one, my next point is important as far as I'm concerned, Mr. President. What powers are we giving the Secretary of Finance, Mr. President, under our bill?
But let me pakita nga yung exact ano. I'm just getting the exact section. In section 15, Mr. President, the Secretary of Finance can approve or disapprove the SMBs on the basis of its compliance to the Philippine valuation standards, Mr. President.
So, is the Secretary of Finance expected to review all those LGU ordinances? Mga more or less, how many are we expecting him to review, Mr. President?
But, Mr. President, in the bill, he's not expected to review the ordinance, but only the schedule of market values. And there are 200, what's the exact? Ano ba yung schedule of market? Ilan nga? Mr. President, there are 228 LGUs. 228 LGUs. That's
200 lang?
81 provinces and 147 cities, because the municipalities is under the provinces, Mr. President. So, in other words, the Secretary will only have to review the schedule of market values of 228 LGUs, Mr. President.
How many provinces, Mr. President?
81 provinces
81 lang pala. Okay.
and 147 cities.
So this schedule of market values are found in ordinances. Tama? Ordinances. Assessor updates the schedule of market values, convinces the Sanggunian to pass it's either the provincial board or the city council to pass this, to recognize it in an ordinance.
Yes, Mr. President.
Ordinance is now submitted to the Secretary of Finance.
No, Mr. President. So what happens is the schedule of market values will be submitted by the assessor to the BLGF to review whether they comply with the standards. And BLGF will submit that to the DOF Secretary to approve or disapprove based on the standards. But when they return it to the local government units, it's up to the local government units to enact an ordinance using that schedule of market values, Mr. President.
Yes, but the local government unit cannot approve a schedule of market values not approved by the Secretary of the DOF. Tama? Di ba? Assessor, BLGF, Secretary of the DOF, approve. Then, saka po ipa-adopt sa LGU. Tama po ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Ganun po ang mangyayari. Okay, sige po. So they cannot, yes, the flow chart is changed in the sense that the assessor acts as if it is under now the BLGF, Mr. President. But we have established earlier that the assessor is an employee of the LGU. Tama po ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President. Only insofar as supervision, Mr. President.
Hindi, pero the BLGF, the assessor is going to be required by this law to submit it to the BLGF. Diba? Will there be a sanction kung ma-skip niya ito? Out of habit, dinerecho niya sa council?
Yes, Mr. President. Well, the current practice, Mr. President, they also submit to the BLGF, Mr.
Pero
President.
not awaiting any,
No,
not
Mr.
awaiting
Only for
any
comments.
action.
Typically, it's for comments, Mr. President.
Magbabago ang flowchart, Mr. President, actually. Assessor, you should not give it to the LGU, to the Sanggunian. Give it to BLGF. Diba? Await its return after proper approval. So, does our bill provide a sanction for the assessor if out of habit, dinerecho pa po niya sa Sanggunian?
Yes, Mr. President, we provided a sanction and a penalty clause here, Mr. President. But I have a slide on the flow chart, Mr. President, if the good minority leader would want to see it. We'll flash it on slide 49. Huh? Yeah, so, Mr. President, so the local assessor will prepare the SMVs, the scheduled market values, and submit it to the regional office, BLGF regional office, and then the regional office will review it and then submits it to the executive director, and the executive director now will will submit it to the Secretary of Finance, and once approved, it will be published in the official gazette, and that will take effect, Mr. President. So that's the flow chart, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, given the flow chart now on the screen, there is no sanggunian action necessary, Mr. President?
For the SMVs, Mr. President.
Yes, wala na.
But in the ordinance, when they enact what they call the local revenue code, they will put the schedule of market values there, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, but basta ang schedule of market values approved by the Secretary of the DOF. Yun yan. That's
Yes,
it.
Mr. President.
Once approved, then it's approved.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah.
President. Effective. Mr.
And then the default rule in our bill is if no action, then after 30 days, deemed approved.
Yes, Mr. President.
Oh, sige. So, and why are we putting that as the default result, Mr. President? Kung 228 LGUs lang naman ang
Yeah, that's true.
aaralin ng DOF, Mr. President.
Well,
Why-
Mr. President, we want
Kasi,
it.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
hiningi ito ng power ng Secretary of DOF and then meron tayong provision na if no action. So, ibig sabihin, may senaryo tayo, hindi niya kaya yung trabaho hiningi niya, Mr.
Actually,
President.
Mr. President, it's only 228, so it's not.
Mr. President.
And
So,
this is done every 3 years, Mr. President. So, but we just put it there, Mr. President, so that the time element will be fulfilled, Mr. President. So there will be no delay, Mr. President.
yes, Mr. President, but it doesn't look good, no, Mr. President. that, from the DOF comes a radical new idea, and yet meron tayong default rule doon
Yes,
na
Mr. President.
if we cannot act on it, deemed approved. Hiningi mo pa, ginulo mo pa yung sistema.
Yeah, Mr. President. So we just placed it there, Mr. President, so that it's really an anti-red tape concept, Mr. President, the deem approved concept.
So yun pala, at least naklaro po natin. And then with the schedule of market values na what is critical is the approval of the Secretary of the DOF. Ito ang gagamitin ngayon ng concerned LGUs for their determination of assessment levels
Yes,
plus the tax rates.
Correct.
Ganun po yan.
And the eventual tax due, Mr. President. So that is the process, Mr. President.
But while right now, yung schedule of market values is in an ordinance by the LGU, issued by the LGU. Tama po?
Yeah, the current practice, yes. Yes, Mr. President. For purposes of enacting a revenue code, a local revenue code.
Yeah, but what is the purpose of returning the SMV to the local government units? For the same purpose? din,
Yes,
no?
for the same purpose, correct.
So
You're correct.
tinanggalan talaga natin ang power, Mr. President. Ang concern ko dito yung effects sa local autonomy, Mr. President. So, for as long as walang approve si Secretary of DF na SMV, hindi makakilo si local sanggunian.
Well, Mr. President, that's why we also put that 30-day deem approved rule, Mr.
Hindi, pwede niya
President.
pang ibalik, sir. Before 30 days, ibalik niya eh. Tapos,
Yes, Mr. President.
then balik ulit sa kanya, ibalik niya ulit. So for as long as walang approved ni DOF, hostage po niya yung sistema sa local government.
If we will
Apo.
return it,
Theoretically, yes, sir.
Theoretically, yes.
We have
If
to
you-
entertain all possible
yes, Mr.
scenarios,
President.
Mr. President.
You're correct. If he keeps on returning it, meaning keeps on bringing it back to the LGU, theoretically, yes, Mr. President.
Yes, and since the assessor is not there, the DOF's employee, wala siyang he cannot even change the assessor, tama?
No, Mr. President,
Yes, he
because
cannot.
that's a local government employee, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. President. Meron bang model ito sa ibang bansa, Mr. President? Our flowchart, our system?
I understand, Mr. President, different jurisdictions will have different way of assessing their real property, Mr. President. So I'll get back to you on that one, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, ito na lang isa pang bigay concern yata to ng mga appraisers pa. Basahin ko po just two paragraphs
Mr.
and I'll get the reaction of our sponsor.
Yes, Mr. President.
The drastic adjustment of the SMV may result in a significant increase in the real property tax due. For example, the SMV of a particular LGU was last updated in 2010. Under this bill, the SMV will be adjusted to its current value. 2023 pa po itong ang ginamit niya na year. Consequently, there would be an exponential increase in the RPT due because of the sudden adjustment of the SMV. Ito po yung insight niya na gusto ko po ng reaction. Homeowners and property developers fear that this will lead to default in home loan payments and forfeiture of properties.
Actually, that was raised by Senator Risa Ontiveros during her interpellation. Well, Mr. President, the local government units should also be alert and proactive to lower down the assessment levels and the tax rates. Definitely, the schedule of market values will increase the property values because it will now be in line with reality. However, the local government units can lower down the assessment level and the tax rate so that it will yield to the same tax due. However, Mr. President, some of our colleagues also voiced out the same concern. So at the proper time, we might introduce some safeguards, Mr. President, to prevent abrupt changes, Mr. President.
Yes, well, Mr. President, siguro I'll just reiterate my concern on the power of the Secretary of the DOF. It might amount to control and no longer just supervision by the. Actually, I think the official who has supervision over LGUs would be the President, Mr. President. So, alter ego siguro niya mga secretary.
Yes,
He
Mr. President.
can give
Correct.
some power to them. Pero this may amount already to control, Mr. President, kasi ang definition kasi ng supervision, you make sure that those under you perform in accordance with law or
Yes.
within law. Ang power naman ng control is you can replace your judgment for the judgment of those under you. Ang nangyari ngayon dito, the LGU, the Sanggunian, cannot entertain a general revision, kasi general revision na of the general revision of real property assessments include assessment levels and tax rates. They cannot do that unless there is DOF approved schedule of market value. So sa flow chart or sa steps required, we might even be interfering with the concept of local autonomy, Mr. President, because merong step doon na may iba ang may control si Secretary of Finance. So that is my greatest worry, Mr. President, and this is actually reflected in the number of sections in the local government code which are proposed to be repealed, Mr. President.
Well, Mr.
If I'm not mistaken, marami-rami po ito.
Yeah. Mr. President, we admittedly some of the provisions there are not some of the provisions in the repealing section needs to be reviewed, and admittedly that some of the items in the local government code should not be repealed. So we are cleaning that up, Mr. President, making sure that we preserve the powers of the local government units and only confine the powers of the Secretary of Finance limited to the role of approving and disapproving based on the standards that the local governments follow. So we're cleaning up the repealing clauses, Mr. President.
So can this representation just be also informed, Mr. President, on the direction? Not less than 9 sections yung
Yes,
nabasa
I
ko.
can see
Pa
that.
sections pa yun, may mga subsections pa po.
Actually, the good
Ang,
minority leader already forewarned me about the repealing clauses, and then when we reviewed it, we saw that some provisions in the local government code should not be repealed and preserved. No? So admittedly, we have to amend that.
Kasi sa akin parang indication yun. Ang laki ng impact niya on local autonomy kung ganun kadami
Yeah,
sa
tama.
po yung na maapektuhan.
Yeah.
At kailangan, hindi lang ito i-modify accordingly, but to be repealed. So I hope that we undertake this review. But
Yes.
at any rate, Mr. President, I think it's time for me to terminate my interpellation kasi we started this around mga 2 years ago ba?
Almost, Mr. Well, the bill itself is matagal na.
Hindi naman.
This is 13th Congress.
I'm just exaggerating, Mr. President, just to lighten the moment, Mr. President. I don't want to compare this with yung baka matawag dito walang kamatayang RP Bara no, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, just to close, we will definitely take the recommendation of our good minority leader to look at the role of the Secretary of Finance, and if there will be a violation of the principle of control versus supervision, and we are open to receiving suggestions and amendments from our good minority leader, being one of the experts of the local government code.
Plus protection of local autonomy, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank our sponsor for his patience and
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
to
you,
our
thank
good
you, Mr.
minority leader.
Well, technically, hanggang last year pa to, last year pa.
We are the meticulous house, Mr. President.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And we welcome debate and amendments and improvements of the bill.
Yes, Mr. President, we were called the slower house, but I'm proud of that because we do our job and really scrutinize each measure that passes
Absolutely.
this plenary.
Absolutely.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2386. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2492 under Committee Report number 172. This is the bill on the Philippine Maritime Zones Act.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this bill is that we are in the period of interpellation. With the consent of the body, I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Francis Tolentino, and to continue this interpellation, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. I move that
Our
they be
distinguished
recognized.
colleague, Senator Francis Tolentino, Chairman of the Committee on Justice, and the Chairman of the Subcommittee, or rather the Special Committee on Maritime Zones, and also to interpolate a distinguished colleague from Nueva Ecija, Camarines Norte, and adopted son of Mindanao, Senator Padilla is recognized.
Maraming salamat po, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo at sa ating pong pinunong mayorya. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Bismillahi wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Isang pagbati po ng kapayapaan sa aking ginagalang at akin po hinahanga ang senador, Senator Francis Tolentino.
Magandang hapon po, Mr. President.
Mahal na Pangulo,
Magandang gabi na pala.
ako po ay nasa pulpito ngayon sapagkat ang akin pong paghanga sa pagmamahal ng taong ito at ang kanyang very passionate na pakikipaglaban para sa West Philippine Sea ay nagkaroon po kami ng mahabang talakayan patungkol po sa naging masasabi ko pong patutsadahan ni Senator Tolentino at ni Senator Bato patungkol po sa usapin ng Sabah. Naitanong po sa interpellation ng ating mahal na Senador Senator Bato de la Rosa sa atin pong ginagalang at hinahangaan na Senador Tol Tolentino. Nagbigay po siya ng kasagutan sa katanungan na napakalalim po nito para sa aming mga Muslim. Batid naman po natin na ang ating mahal na Ginoong Pangulo ay tinatawag naming amain na ang Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Ang ating pong mahal na Pangulo, Senator Mig Subiri, ay alam ko po ang inyong pagmamahal sa Bangsamoro ay natumbasan sa akin pong pakikipag-usap kay Senator Tolentino. Napakalalim po ng kanyang pakikipaglaban para sa Sabah. Ito pong katanungan ko ngayon sa pulpito ay may kinalaman po ito sa Sabah. Sapagkat dito po sa bill na isinusulong ay nagkakaroon po ng maraming katanungan sapagkat noong pong unang gumawa ng batas patungkol dito, ito po ay panahon pa noong 1968 pa ito. Ito po ay nagkaroon muli, inamendahan noong 2008, July. Ito po yung Republic Act number 9522. Ang katanungan po naming malaki ng kamusliman ay doon po sa unang batas na andoon yung patungkol sa ating claim, sovereignty, claim sa Sabah. Pero dito po sa 9522, naging tahimik po ang batas na ito doon sa claim natin. Ang gusto ko pong unang itanong sa ating hinahangaan at talaga pong ang kanyang pagmamahal sa Bangsamoro nung pinakitaan po ako ng mga ebidensya niya talaga. Buong bag ang ebidensya niya ng kanyang pagmamahal sa ating claim sa Sabah. Ngayon, ang tanong ko po sa ating mahal na Senador Tol Tolentino, dito po ba sa panibagong batas na ating isasagawa, ang claim po ba natin sa Sabah ay nandyan pa rin? Hindi po ba nawawala? Hindi po ba nababaliwala dito sa bagong batas na ito ang claim natin sa Sabah?
Opo, Mr. President, mahal na Pangulo, sa katanungan po ng ating ginagalang na Senador Padilla, hindi po natin inaalis ang ating pagkilala, ang ating pag-aangkin sa teritoryo ng Sabah, sa North Borneo, kung saan ang Pilipinas, sa ilalim ng batas na nabanggit ng Ginoong Senador Padilla, ay nakasaad doon sa Republic Act 5446, Section 2, na aking babasahin sa Ingles, na valid pa hanggang ngayon. Ito po yung binanggit niya kaninang batas na na aprobahan noong September 18, 1968. Section 2 states, and I quote, "The definition of the baselines of the territorial sea of the Philippine archipelago as provided for in this act is without prejudice to the delineation of the baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah, situated in North Borneo, over which the Republic of the Philippines has acquired dominion and sovereignty." Mahal na Pangulo, ito pong section tong ito ay hindi na bago nung sinundang batas noong pong March 10, 2009, yung Republic Act 9522, kung saan nakasaad yung baselines ng Pilipinas. Dahil ito po, Mr. President, ay sang-ayon doon sa 1987 Constitution. Nakalagay po dito, babasahin ko yung unang paragraph. "The national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction." Maliwanag po, Mr. President, hindi ho natin inaabandon na yan. Dangan nga lamang, Mr. President, itong usapin po sa maritime zone at tungkol po doon sa United Nations Law of the Sea ay patungkol po sa dagat. Patungkol po sa dagat na nagsisimula, at kukunin ko po, Mr. President, ang aking yung mga marapatin. Meron po akong taglay na mapa rito, Mr. President. At
Ano siya? Analog, hindi digital. Analog. Old school.
kasi po, pinag-usapan 1968. No, 1968, wala pa ho talagang gusto ko po makita ito, Mr.
Yan.
President. At makikita naman ng ginagalang nating Ginoo buhat sa Nueva Ecija. Ito po yung ating baseline sa ngayon. So masasabi natin, Mr. President, na ito po yung ating baseline at yung pag tinukoy po natin yung Maritime Zone Act, ito po ay palabas doon sa baseline. Sangayon po sa United Nations Law of the Sea Convention. Palabas po ito. Ibig sabihin po, umaatras po siya, umaabante po siya papunta sa labas. Magsisimula po sa 12 nautical miles, sumunod po yung 12 nautical miles in a territorial sea, hanggang palabas na po dun sa 200 nautical miles na exclusive economic zone. So ibig sabihin po, ang usapin po ng Sabah ay hindi kasama sa baselines na ito dahil ito po yung archipelagic baselines. At nakalagay po doon sa, Mr. President, doon sa nabanggit kanina na 1968 na batas, ay without prejudice to the delineation of the baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah. So yung Sabah po, magkakaroon din ng sariling baselines na hanggang sa ngayon, wala pa ho tayo. Yung settlement po ng territory ng Sabah ay patungkol po sa lupa, teritoryo po ng lupa, landmass. Ang usapin po natin dito ay patungkol sa atin pong dagat, karagatan, waters, yung palabas po galing sa ating archipelagic baseline. Subalit, sinisigurado ko po sa ginagalang na kasamahan natin sa Nueva Ecija, dito po sa Section 2 ng ating panukalang batas, na gusto ko rin basahin, kung inyo mamarapatin, Section 2, the maritime zones of the Philippines comprise the internal waters, ito po yung tinuro ko kanina, ito yung mga ilog, yung mga bay, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, ito na nga yung sinasabi ko, and continental shelf. All territories of the Philippines shall generate their respective maritime zones in accordance with international law. So hindi po ito salungat doon sa ating Sabah claim dahil po yung Sabah, maliit po itong mapang ito, nandito po sa baba, ay magkakaroon po yan ng sarili niyang baseline at magkakaroon din po yan ng kanyang sariling territorial sea, contiguous zone, at exclusive economic zone.
Professor Tolentino.
Hindi po ito...
My dear
Opo.
colleague, pwede ba mapalagay din sa screen? Kasi hindi ko na makita dito, medyo malayo.
Itataas
Malit,
na po
malit.
ito.
Okay lang. Kung wala pong picture, okay lang.
Ayan. Pwede naman pong i-adjust pataas. Ayan. Okay. Ayan. So, ayan. Pwede pala yun eh. So, ito po yung ating archipelagic baseline. Ito nakapaligid na ito. Konti lang po tayo. Halos 22 bansa lang po sa buong mundo ang merong ganitong hugis at merong ganitong claim sa archipelagic baseline. So, lahat po, ito pong nasa baba, sinasabi ko po, yung usapin sa Sabah, sa North Borneo, ay hindi po bahagi ng law of the sea. Iba pong aspeto po yan ng international law. Subalit, itong batas po natin na pinapanukala, bagamat hindi na nabanggit ang Sabah, ito po ay sang-ayon sa ating saligang batas at nakalagay po sa saligang batas all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction. So, ibig sabihin po, wala po tayong inaabandona, wala po tayong iniiwan na lugar na pag-aari ng Pilipinas at yun lamang pong usapin yon ay iba pong uri ng international law, ang ibang uri ng rehimeng batas ang tatalakay po doon at hindi po dito sa maritime zone. Dahil ito pong maritime zone po ay patungkol lang po doon sa ating main archipelago, Luzon, Visayas, at Mindanao. So magkakaroon po ng sariling maritime zone in the future yung North Borneo, yung Sabah, at ito po ay isang separate na batas, mahal na Pangulo.
Ginoong Pangulo, malinaw po ba na dito sa bill na ito, kailangan maging malinaw po tayo, mahal na Pangulo, sapagkat doon po sa RA 9522, medyo naging tahimik na po kasi ang batas natin patungkol po sa Sabah. Hindi naman po ito ibig sabihin kasi ang isang batas kailangan mo muna talagang i-repeal yan o amendahan. Hindi naman po siya ni-repeal, hindi naman po siya na-amendahan, pero naging tahimik siya. Mahirap naman po siguro, mahal na Pangulo, kung magkakaroon tayo uli ng isa pang batas ngayon na magiging tahimik muli. Siguro kailangan ipaalala na natin uli sa sambayan ng Pilipino na yung ating claim sa Sabah. At ang hinihiling po natin na pagkatapos pong ipaliwanag ng napakaliwanag ng ating ginagalang na senador ay maisama po sa panukalang batas niya ang aming amendment na sinasabi na ibabalik natin kung ano po yung nandoon sa 1968 na law, na yun po yung patungkol doon sa Sabah dahil napakahirap pong namnamin na makakaroon uli ng batas patungkol dito. Siyempre po, ito ay may sovereignty. Pinag-uusapan natin yung sovereignty dito, maging ito man ay sa tubig o lupa. Nandito mismo sa papel na yan, ang pinag-uusapan, sovereignty. Maging maritime man itong usapin nito o anumang usapin nito, sovereignty pa rin ito. At ang claim po natin sa Sabah ay sovereignty. Kaya hinihiling po natin sa atin pong kanina pinakitaan ako talaga, mahal na Pangulo, pinakitaan ako ng ibang klase ang research ni Senator Tolentino sa Sabah. At napakaganda po ng kanyang mga mungkahi at naniniwala po ako na ipaglalaban niya ang Sabah. At naniniwala din po ako na tatanggapin ng ating, sa pagdating po ng tamang pagdinig patungkol sa amendment, ay pakikinggan niya po at tatanggapin po niya ang aming amendment.
Mahal na Pangulo, tama po ang binabanggit ng ating mahal na kasama sa Nueva Ecija na sa Section 2 nga, nabanggit ko kanina, noong Republic Act 5446, mention was made of without prejudice to the delineation of baselines of the territorial sea around the territory of Sabah. Meaning to say, noong 1968, ito po ay, alam niyo po, noong 1968, nagkaroon din po ng debate rito at pinakita ko po kay kagalang-galang na Senador Padilla, si Senator Sumulong at si Senator Jovito Salonga ay nagbigkas patungkol dito. Hawak-hawak ko po yung kanilang records po nila. So binanggit po rito sa noong 1968 yung Sabah. Subalit dito po sa sinabi ng ating minamahal na kasama na tumahimik doon sa March 2009 na batas, yung Republic Act 9522, tama po siya na hindi nilagay yung pangalan ng Sabah. Subalit doon sa Section 3, nakalagay po doon, this act affirms that the Republic of the Philippines has dominion, sovereignty, and jurisdiction all over portions of the national territory as defined in the Constitution and by provisions of applicable laws. So, ibig sabihin po, dito po sa Section 3, pasok din po yung Sabah. Pasok din po yung Sabah. Dangan nga lang, hindi na isama doon sa baseline kasi yung baseline po ay mangangailangan po ng World Geodetic System citation, the latitude, longitude, as well as the distance to the next base point will have to be cited. So, for instance, ito pong the Tolong Point, 117 degrees 6, 14.79 latitude, longitude of 122 degrees, 31.4, etc., etc. Hindi po sinama dito dahil wala po tayong ganoong sukat na ginawa ang NAMRIA, subalit hindi natin inaabandona yung ating claim sa Saba dahil nakalagay nga po doon sa Section 3. So all-encompassing po yung Section 3. Sa katunayan po, nung binalangkas po yung batas na yon, ay katulong din yung dating Solicitor General para si dating Solicitor General Estelito Mendoza para siguraduhin na kasama po lahat yan. Dito naman po sa bagong batas na ating pong tinatalakay ngayon, yung definition po ng baselines ay sang-ayon sa ating saligang batas at nabanggit ko kanina yung sa Article 1, National Territory, kasama rin po yung territories natin over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction. Ang ibig ko pong sabihin, Mr. President, sa lahat po ng ito, yung pagbabago ng batas, yung 1968 na wala pang UNCLOS, yung 9 Republic Act 9522 na meron ng UNCLOS at meron na tayong ibang saligang batas, lahat pong ito ay hindi nag-aabandona ng ating claim sa Borneo dahil nandun po yung sa ating saligang batas. At sang-ayon din po ito, Mr. President, sa umiiral na geopolitical, diplomatic conditions kung saan ang Pilipinas ay naging bahagi ng ASEAN. Noong una, bahagi po tayo ng Southeast Asian Treaty Organization o SIATO. Ngayon, naging bahagi tayo ng ASEAN. Meron po tayo mga kasunduan. At ito, pwede ko nang banggitin sang-ayon sa mga dokumento ng Department of Foreign Affairs sa Malaysia at mga karatig na bansa na yung pagkilala natin sa Saba ay hindi natin iniiwan yung ating historical and legal right, subalit meron pong mga gawain ngayon ang ating executive branch na kinikilala rin ng legislatura kung saan meron pong mga bagay na patungkol sa bilateral relations natin sa Malaysia na mas malawak ang sinasaklaw at merong mga hawak-hawak ko po rito isang memorandum circular nung panahon po ni Presidente Gloria Macapagal Arroyo na merong guidelines na sinunod ang pamahalaan lalong-lalo na sa pagbabanggit ng Saba at ganun din po yung latest na dokumentong hawak ko which I showed to the good gentleman that even the Department of Foreign Affairs as of December 7, 2023, ilang buwan pa lang, ilang linggo pa lang nakakalipas, ay nagsasabi na dapat daw po yung ating saligang batas ay manaig, subalit ayaw nilang gamitin yung diretsuhang lingwahe na hinihiling ng ating kasamang Senador Padilla na sa palagay ko po ay tama. Tama pong banggitin natin, i-claim na to be consistent that Sabah is part of our territory. However, due to our evolving diplomatic and geopolitical ties with our neighboring countries, specifically, banggitin ko na rin ang Malaysia, ay meron pong mga lingwahe na ayaw nilang ipalagay ng diretso. And I understand the sentiment of the good gentleman that and that this should be reiterated, but just the same, the Maritime Zones Law is anchored on UNCLOS. And UNCLOS refers to the seas, the utilization of resources, sovereignty, sovereign rights, freedom of navigation. And the starting point would always be the archipelagic baselines. Ito nga pong tinuturo ko kanina. So, hindi po papasok sa archipelagic baseline natin ang Sabah. Dahil ang Sabah po ay nandun sa labas noong Philippine archipelago na kinikilala natin at ng ibang bansa, yung Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Ang sinasabi po sa mga dating sa mga umiiral na batas pa natin, yung nabanggit ko kanina, ang Sabah po ay magkakaroon ng sariling archipelagic baseline at balang araw magkakaroon ng sariling maritime zone law. Magkakaroon ng sariling territorial sea, contiguous zone, at ng exclusive economic zone. Tama po yung kahilingan ni Senator Padilla na magbanggit ng isang linya na hindi natin inaabandona ang ating pagkilala sa Sabah. Tama po yun. At sa period of amendment, kung ano man po ang magiging lingwahe po nito, mainam pong mahimay ng maayos para lumabas na hindi natin inaabandona ang ating claim sa Sabah. Subalit, hindi po siya magiging bahagi nitong maritime zone law dahil ito po ay patungkol sa isang land territory, not the waters adjacent to the Philippine archipelagic baseline. So, wala po akong tutol doon kung yun po ay magiging refined, diplomatically sensitive, and if it will promote our national interest.
Apo, napakalinaw po ng paliwanag, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo. At ang gusto ko lamang pong ulitin ay napakahalaga po kasi itong RA 9522 na atin pong binabanggit dito. Ito po ay binalangkas bilang pagsunod doon sa UNCLOS. Napakalinaw po noon, napaliwanag din po ng ating ginagalang na Senador Tol Tolentino. Ang atin pong tinatayuan lamang muli ay huwag nating iwan. Kasi pag pinag-usapan natin kasi lagi ang UNCLOS, pag pinag-usapan natin yan, laging umiikot yan sa usapin ng West Philippine Sea. Meron tayong malinaw na dispute doon at sinasabi natin na tayo ay nanalo na sa arbitral ruling at yan ang ating pinaglalaban at tayo ay lahat ay very passionate sa usapin na yan. Ang amin lang mungkahi bilang inyong mga kapatid na Muslim at ito naman ay hindi lamang sa kapakinabangan ng Sulu o ng Tawi-Tawi o ng Bangsamoro. Itong usapin ng Sabah na katulad ng pinaglalaban ng ating mahal na Senador Tolentino sa kanyang isang bag na ebidensya ng atin talaga ang Sabah, ay ganun din natin ipaglaban ang ating karapatan sa Sabah. Sapagkat katulad ng sinabi ng ating mahal na kapatid, na hindi ito usapin lamang ng lulubog lilitaw ng mga isla o maliliit na isla, ito ay malaking lupa ito. Ito ay may langis. Ito ay may mga natural, masasabi nating minerals na dapat. Diyan sa sinasabi nating diplomatic ties natin sa bansang Malaysia, ay kaibigan ko po ang ambassador niyan. Wala po itong personalan. Ito po ay patungkol lamang sa mga bansa. No? Talagang dapat ay nakikinabang ang taong bayan, ang Pilipino, diyan sa Sabah, ngayon pa lang. Kung paano natin ginigiit diyan sa mga isla sa West Philippine Sea, dapat ay igiit din natin ang karapatan natin diyan sa Sabah pero hindi tayo humihingi ng gulo. Dahil katunayan, meron na po diyan naging talumpati ang ating mahal na Senadora, Miriam Santiago, noong 2013 sa kalagitnaan ng pagkakaroon ng krisis diyan sa North Borneo, sa Sabah. Sabi niya, hindi talaga tayo dapat umabot na. At ito naman ang gusto nating sabihin din sa Malaysia na under international law. Sabi, impartial fact-finding facilitates peaceful settlements of disputes. particularly settlement by negotiation, mediation, good offices, or conciliation. Ang liwanag po ito na sinabi ng ating mahal na senadora. International law prohibits the use of force, but there is an unwritten exemption which allows states to protect or rescue their nationals by means of armed forces in the territory of another state. However, this exception should not be invoked. Ito po yung nangyari doon kasi nagkaroon ng siege doon. Kung natatandaan nyo, may mga kababayan po tayo magmula sa Sultanate of Sulu na lumusob dyan at kanilang pinaglaban ng kanilang karapatan dyan sa Sabah. Ngunit nagkaroon po ng hindi pagkakaintindihan at dahil po dyan sa sinasabi ng mga batas na ito na sinusunod ng Pilipinas, hindi po natin nasuportahan yung ating mga kababayan na pumunta doon at pinaglaban ng kanilang karapatan. Kaya kailanman po, malinaw naman sa Malaysia na hindi naman natin magiging kailanman na option ang gerahin sila o sirain ang ating diplomatic rights o ang ating diplomatic relation sa bawat isa. Ang sinasabi lamang po natin, dito, sa pakikipaglaban natin sa West Philippine Sea, dapat makinabang din yung Sabah. Huwag natin iwan. Kung yan man po ay maritime, kung ano man yan, naiintindihan po natin, malinaw na malinaw po yan. Pero bakit hindi natin ibalik yung naandun sa 1968? Kailangan ba natin sundin ang sinasabi ng UNCLOS sa ganitong bagay na, o sige, pag-usapan na lang natin yan. Total, sinabi dun sa 1987 Constitution, section ano, okay na yan, pwede na yan. Pero sa amin, sa mga kamusliman, hinihingi namin na makita namin sa batas. Makita namin mismo sa panukalang batas na nandiyan dyan, na pinuproteksyonan ng Senado. Una-una na ng Senado, ang karapatan ng ating mga kapatid naman ng mga Muslim at ng Pilipinas doon sa claim na sovereignty dyan sa Sabah. Hindi naman po, tulad naman po ng sinabi ng ating mahal na senador na Tol Tolentino na siya ay nakikisama at siya ay naniniwala na dapat lang isama natin. Ay hinihingi po natin sa buong kapulungan na suportahan po ninyo ito. Sapagkat wala po tayong nilalabag na batas dito, international law, kung ano man law. Malinaw po na meron tayong claim sa Sabah, historical man yan. Ito po ay hindi sana maging mitsa, itong batas na ito pa ang isight sa atin balang araw na hindi natin, alam nyo naman, pagdating sa batas, hanapan ng hanapan yan kung saan makalulusot. Ang gusto lamang po natin, walang makalusot dito at dyan ay mailagay yan bilang amendment na kung ano yung nandun sa 1968, wala namang bago eh. Wala pong bago. Ayaw lang natin maging tahimik dahil doon sa 9552 naging tahimik. Naging basihan na lang natin na yung sinasabi ng seksyon na yon. Na okay na yan, understood. Hindi po pwede. Pagdating sa batas, hindi pwedeng puro understood. Dapat kailangan po, precise tayo. Kailangan naniniwala tayo na atin ang Sabah. At naniniwala po ako na yaan ang tindig ng ating mahal na senador na Francis Tol Tolentino.
Po.
Yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Tama po.
Ginoong
Gusto ko lang
Pangulo.
pong idagdag sa ating kaibigan sa Nueva Ecija na hindi lang ito pong maritime zone law na ating binalangkas ay hindi lang po patungkol sa West Philippine Sea. Sinama na rin po natin ang Benham Rice kung saan gusto ko nga pong baguhin ang pangalan bilang talampas ng Pilipinas. So hindi lamang po sa West Philippine Sea, pati ito pong nasa kanang parte papunta po ng Pacific Ocean, kasama na po natin. At ulitin ko po, ang maritime zone bill po ay patungkol sa dagat. Subalit naniniwala po ako na kung ang layunin ng ating butihing senador ay patibayin ang ating claim sa Sabah at gayahin yung 1968 na batas patungkol dito, ako po ay naniniwala na pwede pong banggitin yung gawan sa darating na panahon ng sariling baseline delineation ang naturang teritoryo dahil sumasang-ayon po ako kay Senator Padilla na historically atin po yun. Atin po yun. Hindi lamang pakatapos ng Treaty of Paris, mahaba-haba po ito, Mr. President, pero kasama niya po ako sa pagsusulong ng naturang claim at siguro po sa tamang panahon ng period of amendments kung magkakaroon ng tamang lingwahe na papasok po dito dahil kahit ito po ay patungkol, yung SABA claim po natin ay patungkol sa lupa. Ang maritime zone ay tungkol po sa dagat. Pero kung makakagawa ng tamang lingwahe ng pag-aamyenda, ay hindi po ako tumututol sa aking pong kamag-anak, si Senator Padilla, patungkol po dito. As long as it will strengthen not just the bill, but our resolve that what is rightfully ours should be ours. But just the same, Mr. President, I thank the good gentleman for reawakening us to be more patriotic when it comes to crafting laws that we have to be consistent. Maraming salamat, Senator Padilla. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Ginoong Pangulo, ako po ang dapat magpasalamat dahil ako po akala ko nung araw ang dami ko nang alam patungkol sa Sulu, pero nung pinakitaan niya ako ng ebidensya, talaga pong ako po ay nagpapasalamat at ako po ay binigyan ng magandang education din ng aking kapatid at kamag-anak na senador, Senator Tol Tolentino. Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo. Mabuhay po.
Maraming salamat at maraming salamat din kay Senator Tolentino dahil pwede pala natin gamitin itong tarpaulin sa Senate plenary para as a added visuals instead of the screens.
Yes, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consider Senate Bill number 2492.
Actually, for the record, Your Honors, no, before we suspend, sa US Congress, ganun. When you watch the proceedings ng US senators and congressmen, meron silang easel, and then they show the graph and itong mga displays. Baka wala silang screen doon. No? Medyo low-tech yung kanilang mga committee hearing rooms. Pero, yes, that's a good visual effect.
Marami pa ho ko nito, Mr. President.
Ang maganda dyan kasi pwede mong, Mr. Senator Tolentino, pwede mong ituro yung mga linya, ganun, na hindi mo naman magagawa kung nasa screen. So, thank you. Yes, Majority Floor Leader?
Yes, Mr. President, I reiterate the motion. I move that we suspend consideration Senate Bill number 2492.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
We move to admin matters, Mr. President. With the consent of the body, I move to transfer the committee referral of House Bill number 9682, Teaching Supplies Allowance Act from the Committee on Basic Education Finance to the Committee on Rules. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move to transfer the committee referral of the following bills. Senate Bill number 1218, the Romblon Electric Cooperative Incorporated, from the Committee on Rules to the Committee on Public Service. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Likewise, Senate Bill number 2472, establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in Tamina, Zamboanga del Sur, from the Committee on Rules to the Committee on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform and Finance. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Next is Senate Bill number 2431, Basilan Medical Center Act, from the Committee on Rules to the Committee on Health and Demography and Finance. I so move, Mr.
There
President.
being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, last, with the consent of the body, I move to transfer the referral of the privileged speech of Senator Tolentino on flotilla of 40 boats sailing towards BRP Sierra Madre, delivered on December 6, 2023, from the Committee on Rules to the Special Committee on Philippine Maritime and Admiralty Zones. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session till 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, January 31, 2024.
There being no objection, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Wednesday, January 31, 2024. Have a safe and pleasant evening, everyone.